Hi, my name is Jim Pikarski, and I give Dharma talks and teach meditation here in Venice, Florida at the Blue Lotus Meditation Center. Today I'd like to talk about stations along the path. Um, there's a path, and we go through different transitions as we go along this spiritual path. There's three basic stages. One is that we're lost in samsara, or confusion. The second is that we're on the path, and the last is realization. Before we're on the spiritual path, we're lost in samsara, we're lost in confusion. And this is really due to conditioning and unconsciousness. There's just a lot of suffering. And we go from suffering to suffering, basically. Then there's a transition period. In the transition period, a lot of times societal and material goals lose their importance, and we start embracing spirituality. This can happen at any age. Some people it happens very early, and people turn inward. Sometimes this can be depressing, and people get low self-esteem. They're confused about what to do with their life. Everybody's telling them they should do this, they should do that, and these shoulds are not very attractive anymore. Sometimes people can get stuck there for decades. Or in old age, a lot of times people, when they get older, the goals of their youth don't hold as much energy as they did when they were younger. So there's a lot of people who have a hard time making the transition between being very materially oriented and moving towards spirituality. Sometimes older people can be very brittle because, younger people can just drop out and not be involved in anything. So really, it may take a while to reform one's life around developing love and wisdom and joy and gratefulness and other qualities of our true nature. Typically, people make this transition by finding something to do with their lives that has to do with service. That can be in many different areas. What I found is early in my life, I had a hard time with this, and I decided to be a therapist because as a therapist, I could continue learning, which was part of my growth, and at the same time, I could give and be helpful to others, and that seemed to satisfy both parts of me. One, just dealing with the functioning in the world, and the other was the deeper spiritual growth. So when we are lost in samsara, we tend to organize our lives around things that are ephemeral, things that come and go. And because everything outer comes and goes, it usually is a turn inward as we grow spiritually, because whatever we develop inwardly doesn't come and go. It's there for us. A lot of people come to the path through suffering. The suffering occurs because they're basically chasing something that is illusory. So for instance, they chase money or fame or whatever, and they come up empty-handed. Or they get it and they find out that it's not as pleasing as they thought it was. So the spiritual path is interesting because different religions describe it in different ways, and they take a different quality and they describe it. For instance, in Theravada Buddhism, they really define it by what you need to overcome. So one thing you need to overcome is called the 10 fetters. So as you move through the 10 fetters, you're overcoming certain negativities, and as you overcome these, you're developing yourself spiritually. So just to give a brief thing of the 10 fetters, you can look that up. One is belief in a permanent self, then doubt of the teachings or dharma, 3, attachment to rites and rituals, 4, sensual pleasure, 5, ill will or hatred, 6, craving for the world of archetypal forms, 7, lust for immaterial existence. 8, pride in self, conceit, arrogance. 9, restlessness, distraction. And 10, ignorance. So if you can overcome ignorance totally, then you can be totally enlightened. So breaking the first 3 fetters achieves a state of stream entry. That means that you're really in the stream of spiritual growth. The stream carries one on to nirvana. So if you can break all 10 fetters, you achieve enlightenment. And sometimes it's helpful to look at these things to kind of get a sense of where we are and the direction we may need to go in. The Pali Canon develops this and says that as we cut these fetters, that there's basically 4 steps. The first is cutting the first 3 fetters is to be a stream enterer, and then and if you significantly weaken the next 2, then you can be a once returner. If you cut all 5 of the first 5 fetters, you're a non-returner. And if you cut all 10 fetters, you're an arhat. It seems like some people have done some of this work in past lives because they come into this life and they seem ready to do this just from the get-go. Other people, it really takes them a while to, and they can only proceed a certain amount in this one lifetime. Mahayana Buddhism talks about the bhumis. Now, the bhumis are not presented as something you really need to overcome. They're really presented as states you attain. Interesting way to symbolize this path is by the life of Jesus, not just his teachings, but his actual lifetime. You can use the Buddha's lifetime too in a certain way, because he left his family and he soured of the conventional way of looking at life and wanted to find something deeper. So when you look at the life events of Jesus, you can get a sense of what these stages are, and some people have written books about this. One is called From Bethlehem to Calvary. So birth symbolizes entering the spiritual path. People call this being born again. When you're born again, basically you have developed a spiritual desire inside of you. You can be quite, this can be quite unrefined, and you may be still pretty confused, but there's a sense that you want something greater in your life. The second stage is, or event, or initiation, they can call it, is the baptism in the River Jordan. And this is typically one's first spiritual experience. A lot of times people experience this in meditation, or they experience it just walking down the street. There are books written about people's initial spiritual experiences. And this has been a common feature through a lot of people who had depth throughout history. The third one is called the Transfiguration on the Mount. This is a second, deeper spiritual experience. It's really about the light of insight. It really indicates something deeper because it symbolized the 3 disciples could not look upon Jesus as he was being transfigured. The light was too great. So it is something beyond the mind. It's something beyond the senses. It's really something deep and intuitive and powerful. So these experiences, one thing about them is that they're not abiding. They tend to be glimpses, but they tend to really affect someone on a deep level, because once you experience these, what happens is that they are so different and so much more profound than normal positive experiences. Normal positive experiences can give us happiness, they can be positive to our senses, but these spiritual experiences transcend that, and they can give us, hit us so deeply that it can actually reorient our whole lives. So the fourth one in Jesus' life is crucifixion. Crucifixion is symbolic of realizing selflessness. So realizing selflessness basically is that we are dying to who we think we are, and we are seeing through the illusion of self. And the fifth one is complete enlightenment, symbolized by resurrection. There's a light body, and a lot of religions talk about the light body as an end stage of enlightenment. There are also 7 stages of the path according to Sufism. The last one is no mind, and that's similar to the Buddhist tradition. The Kabbalah has their own stages. And then there's 7 stages of Hinduism. Now, Hinduism puts it in a different way. They talk about developing goodness. So a person, the first stage is really wanting to do good. And then the second stage is, how do I do that? And they really start looking for a way to express their concern for others and their wisdom. And then the third stage is really the thinning of the mind. The ego orientation really starts to lessen in one's life. So these 3 stages are preparatory for the flash of spirit. The flash of spirit is some kind of non-abiding spiritual experience that tends to wake us up. And then the 5, 6, and 7 are deepening of enlightenment until there is dissolution of the separate self. So it's interesting because all traditions talk about a path. They describe the path, and they describe it according to different criteria. So they don't match each other exactly. However, they do tend to match each other on a deeper level, on a level that's beyond concepts. So really developing the path also is developing a focused intention to proceed on the path and come to the end of it. So if we develop that intention, it gives us the power to move along the path and the motivation to move along the path. It doesn't mean that you can't do other things in life. One thing about the spiritual path is that we're really encouraged to also have joy and happiness in our lives. And that can come through a lot of things. But having joy and happiness in our lives is not incompatible with developing a strong spiritual intention. As a matter of fact, that strong spiritual intention will bring more joy and happiness into your life. The only thing that really brings joy and happiness into our lives in the deepest manner is developing love and wisdom. Love and wisdom open us, expand us, and are 2 of the qualities of our spiritual nature. But there are many qualities of our spiritual nature. There's also joy, and there's gratitude, and there's all kinds of things. They're kind of like, a prism breaks the sun down into different colors, So the spiritual is like light, and the different qualities are like the color that is broken down by a prism. So it can be helpful to study some of these things. And if you're interested in trying to get a sense of where you are on the spiritual path and where to go, it might behoove you to look into some of these things. And understand that they're not going to match each other exactly, because they really talk about it according to different criteria. So, you can look at a tree and you can see that some person will be examining the bark, another person will examine the leaves. So whenever you have a complex phenomena like spiritual development, you can look at it in many different ways, but all those ways can be instructive. So anyway, hope this is helpful, and good luck with that.